Good morning, everyone. It's a privilege for me to be here, and I want to thank Peter and the organizers for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. Just getting myself situated. I think I need to turn this off.
No, you just need to move away, he said.
Okay. All right. Good. So, just a quick plug. I want to mention at the University of Florida we're hosting the International Silage Conference in a few weeks, starting from the 21st of July. So you're all very welcome to join us. We hope to see many of you there. We have over 300 people who have registered, so we're very excited and we look forward to seeing you there. All right, I'm going to talk about livestock's role in nourishing the world, and I'm going to start by talking about what I call stark farming. Stark farming, and I'm going to pose the question, how much longer will farming be so stark? Number two, global undernutrition trends. And I put there, stop the libel. Stop the libel. So let's see what I mean by that. Nutritional importance of animal source foods. And then scare them. Bola, that's me. What does that mean? And then finally the charge. And what will you as an individual do? So stark farming. So if we look at farming in the global north, I'm privileged to be responsible for international programs in our college. And a few months ago, we had a Brazilian manufacturer of this device here. This piece of equipment is a phenomenal beast of a machine, which is called an EcoSmart sprayer, that allows you to spray in an AI-enabled manner, and it discerns between different species of forage. It coordinates, measures, identifies the GPS coordinates of what's being sprayed, avoids bare ground. So it's a very efficient, very modern sprayer. And at the University of Florida, this slide here, we have this is another beast. This is Hypergator. Hypergator is the fastest supercomputer in higher education in the US. It was a gift from NVIDIA because one of the two founders is an alum. So we hired 100 new professors in the last 3 or 4 years, and they're all housed in this building. So AI is at the center of everything we do, and consequently, whether it's discerning which specific crops or fruits are exactly at the point of ripening, or using smart sensors on air tags or enrollment boluses to try and monitor performance of animals, to using automated devices to monitor crop growth and performance and so on. AI is at the center of everything we do. So AI is transforming everything. But when I travel, and I travel a lot, so much so that Delta said many years ago that I'm in the top 5% of their flyers, and that's way beyond, way before when my travel increased to what it is today. When I travel, I leave the US and all the privileges and all the luxuries we enjoy, and I go to Africa or Asia or parts of South America, and this is what I see. You know, I see our mothers who are using a hoe to break the earth in the hot sun, and still using what is very traditional. So what Kevin showed in that picture is a very old model, which is probably for here, I don't know, would you say 200 years old? I don't know, since we saw people doing, using manual implements for farming like that. So this is stark farming. And there's a huge difference And it's very important as we talk about global agriculture and nutrition to have both perspectives in mind. So when we talk about global hunger or global nutrition, we need to think about both undernutrition and overnutrition in both the global north and the global south. Now globally, this metric here is stunting, which is low height for a child's weight, according to a UN chart. And it's one of the biggest predictors of undernutrition, and I'll come back to that later on. We can see that this has decreased significantly, and the trend there for wasting, which is a child which is low weight for age, that has also, there's a trend down, but you see that obesity is increasing. And in some countries, you have the dual burden. In fact, in many countries, I dare say most countries, you have the dual burden of undernutrition and overnutrition, even here in the US. And I'll come back to that as we go on. When we talk about hunger, we usually think of a deficit of calories. But one of the biggest problems that we don't talk about is hidden hunger, which is a deficit of micronutrients, key micro and macronutrients, despite having a sufficient intake of calories. And I call it a preventable tragedy of global proportions. So it kills 45% of children under 5. It impairs their cognition for life. And it's very difficult to reverse. And it's intergenerational. And the World Bank says if a country is made up of people whose workforce is stunted, then the GDP of that country is penalized by 7% on average globally. For Africa, it's 10%. In Ethiopia, they told me it's 6%. So when we look at this problem of stunting, this constrains children to a lifetime of underperformance because their brains are not well developed. Nutrition is not the only cause, but I dare say it's the main cause. And where is it prevalent? It's in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa particularly, and also South and Southeast Asia. Now in the US, we're not scot-free. We have about 3% of our people here in the US who are stunted, so it's of our children who are stunted. We have food deserts, we have issues. And some of the malnutrition things that we see here, I'm afraid that with a lot of the trends towards avoiding animal source foods in the diet, in the future, if those people are not taking adequate care to supplement their diets properly, we will see the same kinds of malnutrition problems that we're seeing in the developing world, in the global south. This is a study in the US, which is showing that many micronutrients were deficient in the diets of children. Several of them, vitamin A, and niacin, and so on and so forth, and B6. And they were saying even iron. Iron looked, when you looked at the concentration, it looked like there was sufficient iron. But then when you looked at the blood stores, 7.5% of them had signs of iron deficiency anemia based on ferritin in the serum. And so this is in the US. This is not even the global south. Why? One of the main reasons is the low consumption of animal source foods in the global south. So this is South Asia here, this is Africa, and you can see that the yellow parts of those bar graphs are small fractions of the consumption levels in the global north. Now, as we trend, or as many people, especially our young ones, trend more towards plant-based diets, guess what we're doing? We're adopting more and more towards what we're seeing in the global south. This is a very stark graph that shows the differences in milk consumption in different countries of the world. So on the right-hand side here, we have Sweden and Finland with about 300 liters per person a day. Saskia Hendricks, who was the director, the associate director with me in the Livestock lab, said she didn't drink anything but milk until she was in high school. She grew up in the Netherlands. That's Democratic Republic of Congo, 1 liter a day. Okay? That is a year. That is a year. So I was in Rwanda a number of years, and one of their high government officials said, Bola, I give you permission to scare the people of Rwanda because poor people are saving money and using it to buy uniforms for their kids. And in selling the milk, the government has given each poor family a car. They're selling the milk and using the money to clothe. She said they would be better using that money, saving the milk, feeding it to their kids, to nourish the brains of their kids. So this is in Rwanda. I was there 3 weeks ago again. And this is from their National Childhood Development Agency. Milk consumption by children, 2.5%. 2.5%. This was at a World Milk Day. I was privileged to be there at a wonderful ceremony where they were celebrating milk. I came back, they gifted me a huge book like this on the Nyambo cow, which they say is that's really where the Watusi and the Ankole and so on came from. And Todd Thrift, my friend and colleague, is reading the book was about the culture. But despite that culture, look at the milk consumption level. We're going back there because the government agency that shared that information said they are losing funding for promoting milk. And so we're going to hold a workshop to show them the evidence why they must not do that. We all know this. This is preaching to the audience. We all know about the quality. We all know about the quantity of animal source foods and their superiority. But what we talk about less is this here. Is that it's not just protein. In fact, I think sometimes we're shooting ourselves in the foot when we talk about animal protein because we don't mention the zinc that's more bioavailable. We don't mention the iron, which is really important when most of the women in the world are anemic. Even here, to some degree or another. We don't mention the B12, which you can't get from the plant foods. And we call it animal protein. And so a company can come up with an alternative to milk and call it milk because they've equalized the protein. Because we're emphasizing only the protein. This slide here is showing what happens to a woman or a child when B12 is lacking in the diet. And there's strong evidence for low birth weight, neural tube defects, intrauterine growth retardation, risk of gestational diabetes, and it goes on and on. Insulin resistance, poor cognition, strong to medium evidence for all of those different factors, just from B12 alone. And we talk about animal protein. This is a study that changed my life in 2013. And it was a study done in Kenya that showed that feeding these kids were consumers, 7 to 10-year-old, they were eating diets of beans and corn, protein and energy. Sounds good, right? Well, what they showed is if you add a little bit of meat to the diet of those children, their test scores average over 2 years across all subjects increased by 45%. Adding milk to their diets, just a cup of milk, 28%. This blew my mind. Before then, I was a humble, regular ruminant nutrition professor at Florida. That's what I had done for about 20 years. And then I saw this. And it literally changed my life. That what our kids eat can affect their performance in school. It's not just children. This is a study with adults showing improved cognition with adults and with dairy in this particular case. Meat is usually the one that has the best effect of, but dairy does have an impact as well. And so I think it's dangerous for us to continue using the term animal protein for our industry. And instead we should be calling them brain superfoods. That's what they are. And that's what we should call them. That's what we should call them. And I didn't coin the term brain foods. That was published in Nature, a journal in Nature, a paper in Nature, many years ago called them brain foods. And that's what we should call them. So, I was at the Animal and Dairy Science Association meeting a few weeks ago, and one of my friends said, the FDA said milk is something secreted by the lacteal gland of a ruminant. So help me understand how you can have something that's plant-based and is milk. This is another serious misnomer. And unfortunately, it's confusing and misleading a lot of our kids. And it's not just our kids. I'm concerned and I'm worried that what will happen in 10, 20 years' time with all those who are going without milk now and going for the plant alternatives, what's going to happen to them in terms of bone health? Look, this is a meta-analysis here showing the risk of fracture is so much greater with vegans and vegetarians relative to omnivores. What's going to happen to our youth? What's going to happen to our elderly as they move towards a plant-based diet? And it's not just the protein, it's not just the D3, it's not just the calcium, it's the hormones, there are peptides, and there are papers coming out talking about even the structure of components of milk. It's not just the constituents that are important. And yet, many people fail to understand this. So it's a huge problem. It eats me up. I tell you, it does. Now, there are barriers to consumption of these animal source foods. In India, for instance, I read an article about somebody, poor woman, couldn't see a doctor, tried to get a cup of milk for her son. The vendor said, I will not sell it to you because selling it to you will contaminate my cow that I worship and get the milk from at home. In Ethiopia, I'm going there on Sunday. They have about 250 days of fasting a year. What is fasting? Avoiding animal source foods. There are cultural barriers. We think it's only in the global south. What about meatless Mondays? What about Eat Lancet? What about all this? We wrote a rebuttal to Eat Lancet. Immediately it came out. And there are all these other factors that limit consumption. So, several years ago, in 2015, we got $49 million to establish this. And it was a vote of confidence from USAID and the Gates Foundation. We got about 30 million more to use animal source foods to improve the nutrition, health, incomes of folks in developing countries. And these two major funders saw the importance of these animal source foods in the diet. And we've been privileged to partner with many of you in the room. We've probably had over 100 partners, and we've had 4 journals. We've published over 200 papers, had 4 journals devote special issues to us, and so on and so forth. And some of you are in the room, some of you who have done this work with us. And we've had impacts, like in Nepal, reducing the level of mastitis by 300%. And this wonderful study in Burkina Faso, where children are told if you eat an egg, you will become a thief when you are an adult. And my colleague Sarah McCune was able to break that taboo. And I don't have time to tell you how she did it, but at the end of her study, those kids were eating 6 eggs a week. The women refused to sell the eggs when the men said they should, because they saw that an egg a day made a remarkable difference in their children. It statistically reduced wasting, which is linked to child mortality. So those types of things, they just excite me when I see these studies. Oh, we need much more of these types of studies. And so I'm going to finish by talking about some of the things we're doing, and I'm going to throw out a challenge. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? So if we think about global meat and milk production, this graph here is from OECD FAO. The meat graph is also similar. It's of course not identical. Most of the global production, the growth of our animal source foods is going to be in the global south. That's where the demand is going to be. That's where the population is growing. So this is most populous countries by 2050. I'm originally Nigeria. Nigeria by 2050 is going to be the 3rd, after India and China, most populous country in the world. I don't say that with pride. but it's a fact. It's going to happen. And so that global south, which Keith, I'm sorry I called you Kevin earlier, Keith was referring to, that's where the demand is. And that's where the emissions intensity is highest. And so that's one of the main areas that we need to focus on from an environmental standpoint, from a food security standpoint, from an animal welfare standpoint, and you could go on and on and on. And there are several things that are needed. So policies need to be changed. Sustainable intensification. Advocacy about the importance of animal source foods in the diet. I don't know what Eat Lancet 2 is going to contain. Thankfully, two of our scientists, livestock scientists, were part of the committee, but we have to wait and see. So much supporting commercial producers. Most of the aid money that has gone to the global south has gone to smallholders with very little impact, I'm sorry to say. We need to support commercial producers that have the opportunity, that have the resources to lift the society. We need to rethink how we export produce and products from the West, not produce products from the West to the global south. We need to think about win-win strategies that will be sustainable and long-lasting. In the Sahel, several countries came together to protest dumping of EU fat-filled milk powder into the countries. And the EU, to their credit, reversed the decision and chose to work with them to develop their nascent dairy industries instead. That's what we need. We need those partnerships that help. Sustainable intensification is so important. As I went around different dairies with Jeff Dahl in Rwanda, we're looking at reasons why milk production is low at different farms. We asked the farmers, how do you want to increase milk production? They said, yes. How are you going to do it? I'm going to buy more cows. Literally every one of them said, I'm going to buy more cows. And we said, no, you need to increase production per cow. One of the things that is often a problem and has been a disaster and continues to be a disaster is importation of importation of very superior genetics dairy cows into the global south, where you have heat stress, you have pest pressure, you don't have the right nutrition, you don't have the right management, and it's been a disaster for decades, and it's still happening. Why? Why do we continue doing it? Why don't we go to India or to Brazil and get genetics there for those breeds that are more adapted? But anyway, I would even argue that genetics is not what we should start. And you can say I'm biased. Yes, I am. I'm a nutritionist. We did a global survey in all the countries we worked in the Livestock Systems Innovation Lab. What is the biggest constraint to livestock production? The answer was unanimous. Vets, geneticists across these countries all said feed is where it's at. My friend Mario Herrero, he published this data on strategies to reduce methane emissions from cows. And he gave a lot of different options. And by the way, we published a paper reviewing about 100 different strategies to reduce emissions. What he said is that the most effective and robust method is improving digestibility of forage. So you have to think about two things, effective and robust. And again, it's because of the huge quantities of crop residues that are consumed across the world, that are increasing methane emissions, increasing emissions intensity. And we need to do it. We need to work on that. My friend here, Jose Dubois, just did this study in Kenya with the Maasai. So this is Jane, and Jose was introducing cactus to Jane to help her improve the productivity of her camels and her cows. And Jose discovered that, and he did that successfully. Right, Jose? Did that very successfully. His PhD student is graduating in a couple of weeks. So the science was done, but Jose didn't stop there. He discovered that Jane, when she goes to cook, She has to go and gather firewood outside her wooden fence. It's literally wooden, not picket. When she steps out, she's vulnerable to being attacked by, guess what? Elephants, lions, because this is the Masai Mara. And so what Jose did is he got funding to install a biodigester for her. And he's now working with this professor here who is reintroducing traditional vegetables into Kenya. And she can grow more nutritious vegetables for her kids. And they're also pelleting, they have successfully pelleted the cactus. And this, this is a professor who is taking his science way beyond publication. And it just blesses my soul. So what will you do about it? Some of the things we've done, we just got funding from our university. We got $1 million to establish a brain food initiative, bringing together our College of Public Health and our College of Agriculture. And the chair of our Animal Science Department, John Arthington, is in here. And we're going to be hiring faculty, hiring postdocs, and so on and so forth. And the idea is to establish most conclusively a link between cognition and nutrition. And there are certain things I think in the global south that we need to stop. There are free fertilizer campaigns by NGOs, free seeds, scientists would come to meetings we attend and demand a per diem for coming to a meeting in the city where they live. I've said I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that anymore. This is a very neat study, not a study in Nigeria where thousands, literally tens of thousands of people have died because of farmer-herder conflicts. And this dairy producer in the north started sending a milk truck to collect the milk. Why were people being killed? The traditional pastoralists were using their traditional grazing routes, encountering crop farmers, and clashes would happen and people would die. So he's sending the truck to the pastoralists. He's giving them a premium if their children are in school. With these pastoralists, he's taking some of the milk check money and he's using to buy supplements for them. With that, they stop roaming around the country. We need unique interventions. We need much more milk collection centers. Burn the fences. One of the biggest problems I see in the global south is poor extension. Almost all of us in this room are from land-grant universities. We know and do extension well. Florida, of course, does it the best. Okay? I think there's no question about that. But there are huge divides. In Ethiopia, the USDA deputy DG told me, the USDA equivalent deputy DG said, for 50 years we've been trying new forages. Adoption rate is less than 1%. We need to burn the fences because there are research and extension groups outside. We need to do that. I was at Science Week, which was organized by the CGIAR some weeks ago, and I told a room full of 600 professors that if in the African universities, professors were charged with impacting their communities rather than just publishing papers, if that was a prerequisite for their promotion and their salaries, I said Africa would change. Africa would change. South America would change. South Asia would change. We need to burn the fences. I'm going to finish by talking about a very great privilege I had of meeting with one of the former presidents of Ethiopia. And one of the things he told me, this is his wife, and she said there are no fences between research, having visited the Wisconsin dairy industry, no fences between research, industry, and farmers in your system. And I said, yes, ma'am, there are none. But in most of the global south, there are huge fences. So the former prime minister, he said, he attended a meeting with 52 African billionaires, and he challenged them and said that only one of you has invested in agriculture. I went back thinking, I didn't know that we have 52 billionaires in Africa. So I went back with two things in mind. One is starting to tell people in Africa that we need to adopt the US mentality of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. Because in many of our countries, people are waiting for the government, and we need to stop that. Secondly, I started thinking about who are my friends who have means. And 5 of us got together and started thinking, we're not waiting for the government. We need to find a way to kickstart private sector-led transformation of agriculture. So we identified some leading private sector commercial producers, and we're supporting them. We're working with them. They are piloting on a large-scale research-proven interventions backed up by some of our UF professors. So I'm going to conclude by saying that undernutrition has decreased in the last 20 years, but stunting wasting has too high in the global south. But guess what? Even here, at 3%, too high. More, and I will say this emphatically, more animal source food consumption is needed by the vulnerable in the global south. Here, more consumption in a moderate manner is needed to avoid diets that are so laden with over-processed foods, with calories that predispose to diabetes. Okay? More emphasis should be placed on production and consumption of nutrient-dense foods, and then complementary efforts, biofortification and so on and so forth. They're good, but they're not as good as the animal source foods. This vitamin A enriched rice and so on and so forth. They don't compare. Because the animal source foods, if we get those systems right, they're more sustainable, they're more impactful. So we need to think about the barriers that I mentioned to consumption of these foods, and we need to tackle them. Affordability, reducing emissions, perishability, the taboos. And so I'm going to finish there and end with this question. What will you do? Thank you.